game I'd like to feature from round 4 of Wijk aan Zee 2016 is Hou Yifan against David Navara. I should say that I'll also take a look at the game between Giri and Fabiano Caruana, but anyway, this is my main game. So, Hou Yifan, she's making great strides at the moment towards the 2700 level, playing extremely well this year. And playing against David Navara, well, we know how dangerous he can be. But Yifan, with the white pieces, I think already has a significant advantage in this position. This arose out of an advanced Caruana. So you can see that the resulting position is very much akin to a French defence. White has this nice pawn on e5, and black is obviously blockading these pawns, but this space advantage means that black can't maneuver so easily behind the lines. These squares are controlled by the pawn, but white, on the other hand, can maneuver far more easily than black. I suppose the only danger for white, or danger in inverted commas, is that rooks could be exchanged off on these open files, and of course that could lead to a draw. But anyway, white's certainly better here. Let's see how the game developed. Rook c1. So rook comes to the open file. Fine. Black would like to challenge, but at the moment that a pawn would be on prise. So Navara defends with b6, but of course that weakens the c6 square, and Yifan plunged the rook in to c6. Now if black defends that e6 pawn, let's say bishop f7, then you can see, well, with bishop b5 black is already under pretty serious pressure here. I think that's already a very good illustration of how white can use this kind of space advantage. So Navara came up with a different way of meeting this threat. He played rook c8. Well, obviously an exchange will be fine for black. But after, well, an almost 18-minute think, Yifan took the plunge and captured on e6. Now Navara's idea was that the rook is now trapped. Well, this is true. Rook moved to the side, and now bishop e7, so rook has nowhere to go. However, this is a bit of a gift for white, because with that e6 pawn gone, then the f5 pawn is suddenly very weak, and after bishop d3, this is rather nasty for black. If black tries to defend the pawn, let's say with bishop g8, then, well, for example, queen h5 just increases the pressure again. So Navara really has to take this rook. So the pawn went with check, king stepped back, and now here's a very nice moment. If white takes the bishop, then this will give black defensive chances. Perhaps you can take this pawn. The queen might be able to come over to f6, depending on how white reacts. Obviously, after taking pawn first, you have to watch out for the knight. But instead of taking the bishop, white plays queen g4 first. This is very nice. So at the moment, white a whole rook down, but 2 pieces threatened. Now, if the bishop drops back, then after bishop takes d7, well, you can see 2 connected passed pawns, and white only the exchange down. Well, that's just crushing for white. So rook c7 played. Now, again, white could take that bishop, but black may be able to use that square for the queen or the knight. But before taking that bishop off, Yifan nudged the queen back, threatening the pawn and obviously mate, and this forces a concession from black. The only way to defend is to advance, which feels really loose, and only then did she take on d6, attacking the rook. Rook has to go to the side. I mean, not a beautiful position for the rook. Obviously, it has to keep defending the knight on d7. Right, so we can kind of take stock. At the moment, white has 2 pawns and a bishop against a rook. Well, that already in itself is a pretty decent material balance, considering that white has the 2 bishops. So the question is how to make progress. Well, this pawn blocks white's pieces, so let's move the bishop and advance the f-pawn. So bishop e6, and of course if the bishop is taken, then that's going to lead to checkmate, rook g1, etc. So knight f6 defends the pawn, but now f5, so locking in that bishop to this beautiful square, and of course opening up the bishop's diagonal. And if the bishops are exchanged, of course that opens up the f-file, and something like this is absolutely disastrous for black with all this pressure. So queen takes d6, but now the bishop comes in on those beautifully weak dark squares, beautiful for white, not black. And here, well, these bishops are just wonderful. And obviously, with this pawn advanced as well, and black's weak in king position, I mean, I think, objectively, this is already lost. Black needs to bring the rook across. So bishop g8, which gives away another pawn. I mean, that's not so serious. It's the fact that black's king is so exposed. At least the rook has been able to come across. So for the moment, black's defences are holding. So what is going to tip the balance here? Well, it's that knight. It's really poorly placed here, but can you imagine if we transplanted that knight to g6? Well, that would be pretty good if we managed to get it there, or anywhere decent on the king side, really, maybe g4 or f4, whatever. Okay, so we need to put the knight there. So knight c1, it's making a very simple journey, and the problem is that black really has no defense, because can't exchange off this bishop, because that will just open up the f-file with this disastrous pin here, and white wins. So black can do nothing in this position. Navara exchanged queens, but actually it makes no difference to the position. The knight continued its journey towards g6, and here, well, knight g6 immediately is good, but Yifan just finessed, putting the rook to a worse square, and then played knight g6. I mean, there really wasn't a better move than this, but of course this is terrible. So 2 rooks threatened, Navara took, and now king g2, and there are still 2 rooks threatened, so that really is the end of that. I mean, with hindsight, this looks like such a smooth game by Hou Yifan. Almost like clockwork, the way everything just fitted together. But I would say, well, first of all, there's the judgment that the exchange sacrifice was strong, but also there are just a couple of little finesses with the queen, for example, instead of taking the bishop first, that made life much easier for white, and I think those were the really beautiful moves in the game. So convincing victory for Hou Yifan, who now has 2.5 out of 4. Let me show you the end of the game between Anish Giri and Fabiano Caruana, 2 great rivals. And, well, the advantage changed hands a few times in this game, but finally Caruana, with the black pieces, ended up in a very promising endgame with an extra pawn here. Active rook, active king, very good winning chances. Let's see what happened. First of all, well, black wants to advance the e-pawn, so h5, and putting this pawn further down the board certainly doesn't harm black's position in any way. a4, okay, white really can only wait here. e5, that's fine, and white can only wait. Okay, the rook activates a little bit as well. And well, h4 is good here. Caruana chose e4, also extremely strong. And white has to bring the king up now, otherwise, well, I mean, one thing that could happen if white's king doesn't come up the board is this king could simply travel over, maybe even go for this pawn. So anyway, king e3, absolutely necessary. Now a check. Now we're reaching the crunch moment in the game. Rook d3 check, king c4. The king advances to support the e-pawn. White grabs a pawn and is hoping for some counterplay. And now rook takes h3. And now Giri shot the rook down the board. At this moment he started playing more quickly and looked a little bit more confident. So, I mean, there are various ways that black can try here, but let's see the game. So white now advances his pawn. Passed pawn should be pushed, both sides advancing. Now a7. Now white threatens to play rook check and make a queen, so the king has to duck in front of the e-pawn. Now at the moment the rook shouldn't move because of rook takes pawn, so whoops, I miscued. So white's king comes up to support. h3 from black. Now king b6. Now if the h-pawn advances, then rook h8 and picks this one up. So black has to check the king away. And now again the threat is to move the rook away and queen, so the rook has to come back. And then king b6, and basically they're repeated moves, and that was a draw. Let's go back to this position. Now, instead of capturing the pawn on h3, it would have been much better to play rook a3. In fact, this pawn doesn't matter so much at the moment. The important thing is to advance this pawn as quickly as possible. And in fact, black lost time by capturing the pawn because the rook moved away. The rook needs to be behind that a pawn. That's really important. So let's see. Okay, rook a8. The e pawn advances, so the rook in the perfect position behind the a pawn, and now the pawn goes forward. The king supports the pawn. Can actually take the a pawn, but king f3. I mean, this is somehow very simple actually. Well, I say that. Not at the end of 5 hours and with rooks and pawns and kings spinning around. But anyway, king b4. Okay, now the rook comes back. Okay, let's advance the a pawn. The e pawn advances. So now simple threat to play rook e3 and the pawn goes through. And well, white has really nothing against that. For example, check. Rook comes back, and here, well, you have to give up the rook, and then, well, the rook takes care of this pawn, and then the king goes for that one, and that's game over. What about other variations? Let me see. Let's go back to this position. Okay, what about king c4 to hassle that rook? Well, the rook comes back to d7. If the a pawn advances, let's advance the e pawn again, and king f2. Once again, black only needs to queen that pawn, and it's over. So, for example, here, check, and nothing to do. Okay, so what happens if the rook hassles the king? And now checks again, and the king has to go in front of the e pawn. Okay, let's have a look at this. This is a nice variation. So in this case, it's not so clear. If white can give up the rook for the pawn, then the king on c4 will be able to shepherd the a pawn. But now here's a nice move, rook e7. So this prevents the rook from coming to e5. And if rook g5, then you can stop the rook sacrificing itself here. And if rook b5 with this idea, then that is a very, very crafty check. King can't come here because it'll stop the rook coming down. So for example, king here, and then, well, let's say king f2, and that's a queen. And if king d5, then you take off the a pawn. This one's going to queen, and then the rook just scoops the pawn before white's king can get over there. Well, lots of variations here, but basically this was the moment when Caruana could have won the game. Rook a3 would have done it. You can't generalize in these kind of positions. You simply have to calculate, and that is the secret of good technique, but very unfortunate for Fabiano Caruana, who just lost his concentration at this final moment. He's still in the lead. Caruana 3 out of 4. Several players on 2.5. Wesley So, Hou Yifan, Karyakin, who beat Tomaszewski today, Ding Liren, and Elyanov, who beat Luc van Velde today. And Giri 1.5 out of 4, so still in touch. But if he'd lost that would have been serious. Carlsen drew again today with Mamedyarov. He still is on 50%, but there's a long way to go in the tournament.